Think like winners.
The truth hit him one quiet morning while the city was still half asleep. Daniel stood by his kitchen window holding a cold cup of coffee, staring at a life that felt smaller than it should have been. He was not lazy. He was not stupid. He had worked hard. Yet somehow, year after year, the results never matched the effort. Promotions went to others. Opportunities slipped past him. Hope showed up briefly, then vanished like smoke. That morning, a single thought pierced through the noise in his head and refused to leave. What if the problem was not the world? What if the problem was the way he had been thinking about the world? Most people never ask that question. They accept the lie early and build their lives on top of it. They are told success belongs to the lucky, the gifted, the well-connected. They are told life is unfair and resistance is pointless. Over time, these ideas sink deep and become invisible rules that govern every decision they make. Daniel had believed those rules too, without ever choosing them. He had blamed the economy. He had blamed his upbringing. He had blamed bad timing and worse bosses. And in doing so, he had quietly surrendered the one power no one could ever take from him. The power to choose his thoughts. Napoleon Hill once wrote that whatever the mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve. Daniel had read that sentence years ago and dismissed it as inspirational talk. But standing there by the window, he realized something unsettling. He had never truly believed anything great about himself. Not deeply. Not consistently. His mind had been trained for limitation, not possibility. This is where every transformation begins. Not with money. Not with connections. Not with a miracle. It begins with a moment of honest awareness. A moment when a person realizes that the greatest prison they have ever lived in was built inside their own mind. Daniel thought back to his childhood. He remembered well-meaning adults warning him to be realistic. Do not dream too big. Do not expect too much. Be grateful for what you get. Those words were meant to protect him, but they had done something far more dangerous. They had taught him to expect less from life and even less from himself. Without knowing it, he had been broadcasting those expectations every day. His posture, his tone, his choices, his hesitation. All of it carried the same silent message. This is all I am allowed to have. The world had responded accordingly. Here is a truth few people are brave enough to face. Life does not give you what you want. It gives you what you expect. Not consciously. Automatically. Your expectations shape what you notice, what you attempt, and what you walk past without even seeing. Daniel began to see the pattern everywhere. When he expected rejection, he spoke cautiously and avoided bold requests. When he expected failure, he delayed action and called it planning. When he expected struggle, he noticed every obstacle and ignored every opening. His thoughts had not been passive. They had been commands. Napoleon Hill called this the principle of definiteness of purpose. But purpose alone is not enough. A person can want success and still think in ways that guarantee failure. Desire must be backed by belief. And belief is nothing more than a habit of thought repeated until it becomes accepted as truth. Daniel had mastered the habit of doubt. That morning, he made a quiet decision that would change the direction of his life. He decided to study his own thinking as carefully as a banker studies numbers. Every negative assumption. Every automatic excuse. Every thought that whispered stay small, stay safe, stay where you are. He realized something powerful. No one had ever proven those thoughts were true. They had simply been repeated long enough to feel true. This is the great secret hidden in plain sight. Your mind does not distinguish between truth and repetition. It accepts whatever you feed it consistently. Feed it fear, and it will build a life designed to avoid risk. Feed it belief, and it will build a life designed to grow. Daniel started small. He did not lie to himself or pretend everything was perfect. He simply refused to let his old thoughts go unchallenged. When a voice said you are not ready, he asked ready for what? When it said you will fail, he asked based on what evidence? When it said people like you do not succeed, he asked who decided that? Each question weakened the old programming. Napoleon Hill taught that the mind is a battlefield and that thoughts mixed with emotion become powerful forces. Daniel understood now why emotion mattered. Fear had fueled his doubts for years. If he wanted different results, He needed different fuel. He began to deliberately imagine himself succeeding. Not vaguely. Clearly. He imagined walking into rooms with confidence, speaking with certainty, acting without apology. At first it felt uncomfortable, even foolish. But repetition began to soften the resistance. Something subtle started to change. His body language shifted. His voice grew steadier. He spoke up more in meetings. He applied for opportunities he would have ignored before. The world did not magically transform overnight, but it began to respond differently. People listened. Doors did not open because the universe favored him. They opened because he finally showed up as someone who expected them to open. This is the law Napoleon Hill spent his life teaching. You do not attract what you want. You attract what you believe you deserve. Your belief sets the ceiling. Everything else rises or falls to meet it. Most people never question their ceiling. They inherit it and defend it fiercely. Daniel chose to challenge his. Part 1 of his journey was not about wealth or status. It was about reclaiming authority over his own mind. He understood now that until that battle was won, every external effort would be sabotaged from within. This is where your story begins too. Before strategy. Before action. Before results. There must be a decision. A decision to stop letting old thoughts run your life on autopilot. A decision to recognize that the invisible force shaping your outcomes has been your thinking all along. In the next part, Daniel will learn how desire becomes unstoppable when it is fused with belief and backed by a clear purpose. But none of that matters unless you first accept this truth. Your mind is not a witness to your life. It is the engine. And once you learn how to control it, nothing remains the same. Part 2. The day Daniel declared war on his old self. Fear knocked on Daniel's door the moment he decided to change. Not loud. Not dramatic. It came quietly, disguised as reason. It whispered that this new way of thinking was dangerous. It warned him not to get his hopes too high. It reminded him of past failures as if they were permanent verdicts instead of temporary lessons. That was when Daniel understood something vital. Change does not announce itself with comfort. It announces itself with resistance. Napoleon Hill wrote that every great achievement begins with a decision. Not a wish. Not a hope. A decision so firm that it cuts off all retreat. Daniel had made that decision, and now the old habits of his mind were fighting back. He realized that mastering his thoughts was not a one-time event. It was a lifelong discipline. A daily confrontation with the version of himself that had learned to settle. He could no longer afford to be gentle with his weaknesses. He needed to become both judge and champion of his own mind. Daniel began each morning with brutal honesty. He asked himself one question before anything else. What thoughts am I allowing today that are stealing my power? At first, the answers were uncomfortable. He saw how often he doubted himself before anyone else had a chance to. He saw how quickly he assumed rejection. He saw how deeply the habit of fear had been woven into his identity. But instead of condemning himself, he did something different. He took responsibility. Hill taught that circumstances do not shape character. Character shapes circumstances. Daniel finally understood what that meant. His life looked the way it did because his thinking had shaped it that way. If he wanted different results, he needed to become a different thinker. That did not mean pretending fear did not exist. Fear was still there. Failure was still possible. Doubt still knocked. The difference was this. Daniel no longer allowed fear to vote. It could speak, but it could not decide. The first real test came at work. A project opened up that required leadership. In the past, Daniel would have waited quietly, hoping someone noticed him. This time, the old voice said, "Do not embarrass yourself. You are not ready. Someone better will step forward." Daniel stopped. He caught the thought in mid-sentence. He asked himself a new question. What would a man who expects to win do right now? With his heart pounding, he raised his hand. Nothing magical happened in that moment. The room did not erupt in applause. But something far more important occurred. Daniel broke a pattern. He acted in alignment with belief instead of fear. That night, he realized why positive thinking creates results. Not because it bends reality instantly, but because it bends behavior consistently. Each small action shifted his trajectory. Each decision made from confidence instead of caution moved him onto a new path. Napoleon Hill called this the compounding power of thought. Small mental shifts repeated daily create massive results over time. Most people quit before the compounding begins. Daniel decided he would not. He began guarding his mind like a fortress. When a thought said you always fail, he challenged it immediately. Always is a lie, he told himself. I have succeeded before, and I will succeed again. When his mind said nothing ever works out, he countered with evidence of times it had. This was not pretending. It was training. Daniel understood that the mind cannot hold two opposing beliefs with equal strength. One must dominate. So he deliberately fed the belief that served him. He read stories of people who rose from nothing. He listened to voices that spoke of possibility instead of limitation. He reduced his exposure to constant negativity and complaint. He noticed something strange. The less he consumed discouraging input, the quieter his doubts became. The environment had been shaping him all along. Hill warned that habits are stronger than intentions. Daniel built rituals to support his new thinking. Each morning, he spent 10 minutes visualizing himself acting with confidence and clarity. Not dreaming vaguely, but seeing specific situations and specific responses. His mind began to treat these images as familiar territory. When real opportunities appeared, he stepped into them with less hesitation. His body recognized the posture. His voice recognized the tone. He had rehearsed success mentally before living it physically. Weeks passed. Then months. People started responding to him differently. They sought his opinion. They trusted his judgment. Opportunities came not because the world had changed, but because Daniel had changed the signal he was sending. He learned another Hill principle that changed everything. The world mirrors the dominant vibration of your mind. Confidence attracts cooperation. Certainty invites support. Fear repels opportunity. Daniel was not fearless. He was disciplined. He refused to let fear define him. Failure still came. Mistakes still happened. But they no longer crushed him. He saw them as information, not identity. Each setback became feedback. Each disappointment became direction. This was the secret the mediocre never learn. They allow circumstances to write their story. Daniel decided to write his own point one evening. Sitting alone after a long day, he realized how far he had come. Not in money or status, but in authority over himself. He trusted his mind now. He no longer felt like a victim of chance. He understood that the transformation always begins invisibly. The internal shift precedes the external result. The seed grows underground long before it breaks the surface. Daniel knew he was still early in the journey. Mastery was not a destination. It was a commitment. A promise to himself to never again surrender his thoughts to accident or habit. He burned one truth into his memory. If fear dominates, faith cannot breathe. If doubt rules, confidence dies. So he chose daily which one would rule, and slowly, steadily, he became the kind of man whose presence changed rooms. Not because he demanded attention, but because his mind was aligned, focused, and convinced of possibility. In the next part, Daniel will learn how desire, when fused with a burning purpose and backed by faith, becomes a force no obstacle can stop. But for now, this lesson was enough. Control your thoughts, or they will control you. And once you take command, there is no going back. Part 3. The morning that changed everything. The morning Daniel truly changed was quiet. No thunder. No dramatic music. Just the soft hum of the city waking up and a decision made in silence. He sat alone at his kitchen table before sunrise, hands wrapped around a warm mug, phone turned off, television dark. For the first time in his life, he had beaten the world to consciousness. Napoleon Hill taught that whoever controls the morning controls the day, and whoever controls the day controls their destiny. Daniel had read those words before, but this morning they landed differently. He finally understood that if he allowed the world to rush into his mind first, it would decide who he became that day. Fear, noise, urgency, comparison, all of it would take the wheel before he even noticed. So he did something new. He sat in silence and declared who he would be before anything else could speak to him. I am calm today, I am decisive today, I face challenges with strength, I act with confidence even when I feel uncertain. The words felt strange at first, like wearing a new suit that had not yet molded to his body. But he stayed with them. He closed his eyes and imagined the day ahead. Meetings. Problems. unexpected obstacles. He saw himself handling them with composure. He heard his own voice steady and clear. He felt his body upright, relaxed, grounded. This was not daydreaming. This was rehearsal. Hill explained that the subconscious mind does not distinguish clearly between a vividly imagined experience and a real one. Daniel could feel it happening. His heart rate slowed. His breathing deepened. His nervous system accepted the images as preparation. He was training for life the same way an athlete trains for competition. That day unfolded differently. Not perfectly, but differently. When tension appeared, it did not overwhelm him. When pressure showed up, it did not knock him off balance. He had already lived this day once in his mind. Reality felt familiar. That night, Daniel reviewed his thoughts like a judge reviewing evidence. Where had fear crept in? Where had he caught it? Where had he acted in alignment with his intention? He did not criticize himself. He observed and adjusted. This became his ritual. Morning intention. Evening review. Day after day, something inside him hardened in the best possible way. His confidence was no longer dependent on mood. It was built on discipline. Then the voice of doubt pushed back harder. This is too simple. You tried things before. Life is more complicated than this. Daniel recognized the voice immediately. It was not new. It was the accumulated weight of his past speaking through habit. Every disappointment. Every accepted limitation. Every time he had lowered his expectations to avoid pain. Instead of arguing with it, he remembered Hill's warning. Debate feeds doubt. Action starves it. So Daniel chose one small area of his life where he had quietly accepted defeat. His health. He had told himself he was not disciplined enough. Not consistent enough. Not the type who sticks to routines. He set a simple goal. Not dramatic. Not heroic. He would exercise for 20 minutes every morning. No excuses. No negotiation. The first morning was uncomfortable. The second was worse. The voice mocked him. This will not last. You always quit. He moved anyway. Confidence did not come first. Action did. By the end of the week, something undeniable happened. Evidence appeared. He had kept a promise to himself. The doubting voice grew quieter. Not gone, but weaker. Hill was right. Confidence is not something you wait for. It is something you earn. As Daniel collected small wins, the pattern became clear. Fear could not survive movement. It thrived only in hesitation. The moment he acted, fear lost its grip. He began to smile at the voice of doubt. It no longer felt like an enemy. It felt like an outdated guard dog barking at shadows. He acknowledged it and kept walking. Another lesson soon revealed itself. Language mattered more than he ever imagined. Daniel started listening to his own words. He was shocked by how often he sentenced himself without realizing it. I cannot afford it. I am not good at that. Things never work out. Each phrase was a command. Hill taught that the subconscious mind is obedient. It does not argue. It executes. Daniel saw now how faithfully his mind had followed his careless instructions. He began changing his language deliberately. Instead of I cannot afford it, he said how can I afford it? Instead of I am not good enough, he said I am improving every day. Instead of nothing works out, he said I am finding better ways forward. The shift felt awkward, even artificial. But repetition softened resistance. Soon the new language created new emotions. New emotions produced new actions. New actions produced new outcomes. This was not magic. It was mechanics. Daniel noticed that when he spoke differently, he thought differently. When he thought differently, he acted differently. And when he acted differently, people responded differently. He had begun broadcasting a new signal. Hill called this the law of attraction, but Daniel understood it in practical terms. You do not attract what you wish for. You attract what you consistently think, speak, and act upon. The world had not changed. His perception had. Where he once saw closed doors, he now noticed cracks of opportunity. Where he once assumed rejection, he now tested possibility. His mind had become a radar for solutions. Two people could face the same problem and live in completely different realities. Daniel had lived both lives. The difference was not circumstance. It was interpretation. This realization was liberating. It meant he was no longer at the mercy of events. He was the author of meaning. And meaning shaped emotion. Emotion shaped action. He stopped waiting for the world to improve before he felt better. He chose to feel stronger first and let the world respond. This was the secret the weak never learn. They say life made me this way. Daniel now knew the truth. The mind meets life first, and that meeting determines everything that follows. By the end of this phase of his journey, Daniel was no longer hoping for change. He was expecting it. An expectation, he learned, is a powerful force. In the next part, Daniel will discover how a burning desire, when paired with clarity and persistence, becomes a force so strong that obstacles begin to collapse under its weight. But for now, one truth stood unshakable. What you do every day determines who you become. And Daniel had finally taken control of his days. Part 4. The moment desire became dangerous. Desire became dangerous the night Daniel could not sleep. He lay awake staring at the ceiling, not because he was worried, but because something inside him had ignited. For the first time in his life, he did not merely want a better future. He expected it. And that expectation refused to let him rest. Napoleon Hill wrote that desire is the starting point of all achievement, but only when it is intense enough to crowd out every opposing thought. Daniel finally understood the difference between wishing and wanting. Wishing is polite. Wanting is desperate. Desire, real desire, is relentless. For years, Daniel had said he wanted more. More success. More freedom. More respect. But his desire had been weak, diluted by fear and comfort. It had asked quietly and accepted no as an answer. Now it was different. His desire had teeth. This was not desperation born of panic. It was hunger born of clarity. Daniel had reached a point where returning to his old way of thinking felt impossible. He could not unsee what he now knew. He could not unknow the power of disciplined thought. And once a man understands that his limits are largely self-imposed, comfort becomes unbearable. That night, Daniel wrote something he had never written before. A clear statement of purpose, not vague. Not polite. Specific. He wrote what kind of man he was becoming. What kind of life he was building. What he expected from himself. What he refused to tolerate any longer. Napoleon Hill called this a definite chief aim. Most people drift because they have never decided where they are going. Daniel decided. He did not write what he hoped might happen someday. He wrote what he was committed to creating. He read it out loud, slowly, deliberately. He felt resistance rise up inside him as he spoke the words. Doubt protested. Fear objected. That is when he knew he was doing it right. If your goal does not scare you a little, it is too small. The next day, Daniel began living as if his purpose mattered. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Quietly and consistently. He protected his time. He guarded his energy. He said no to distractions that once consumed him without question. People noticed. Some encouraged him. Others mocked him gently. A few tried to pull him back into the comfort of old conversations and shared complaints. Daniel recognized this pattern instantly. When you change, you threaten the stories others tell themselves. Napoleon Hill warned that the people closest to you often test your resolve first. Not out of malice, but out of fear. Your growth challenges their acceptance of stagnation. Daniel did not argue. He did not preach. He simply continued. This was the phase where desire met resistance from the outside world. The honeymoon period was over. The excitement of new thinking had to mature into discipline. Opportunities began to appear, but so did obstacles. One project Daniel believed in deeply failed. Not partially. Completely. The old version of him would have collapsed inward, taking the failure as proof that hope was dangerous. This time, something different happened. He felt disappointment. He felt frustration. But he did not feel defeated. Napoleon Hill taught that every failure carries with it the seed of an equal or greater benefit. Daniel chose to look for the seed. He reviewed what went wrong without emotional self-punishment. He extracted lessons. He adjusted his approach. Failure no longer defined him. It informed him. This was the moment his desire became unshakable. It was no longer tied to immediate success. It was anchored to identity. He was not chasing an outcome. He was becoming a man who finishes what he starts. And once desire fuses with identity, quitting feels like self-betrayal. Daniel also learned the power of persistence. Not loud persistence fueled by excitement, but quiet persistence fueled by commitment. The kind that shows up even when motivation is gone. Hill wrote that persistence is to the character of man as carbon is to steel. It tempers strength through pressure. Daniel felt the pressure now, and he welcomed it. Every day, he returned to his purpose. He read it in the morning. He reviewed his actions at night. He asked one simple question. Did my actions today move me closer or further away from the man I am becoming? Some days the answer was uncomfortable. On those days, he corrected course. No drama. No self-hate. Just adjustment. Slowly, something remarkable happened. The world began treating him differently. Not because he demanded it, but because he carried himself differently. His decisions were clearer. His boundaries firmer. His energy steadier. People trusted him because he trusted himself. He attracted collaborators instead of critics. Mentors instead of doubters. Opportunities that once seemed out of reach now appeared through conversations, introductions, unexpected openings. Daniel understood now what Hill meant when he said success comes to those who become success conscious. This was not about positive thoughts floating in the air. It was about alignment. His thoughts, words, actions, and purpose were finally pointing in the same direction. There was no internal war anymore. That alignment created momentum. And momentum is powerful. Once in motion, progress feeds itself. Daniel also learned an uncomfortable truth. Desire demands sacrifice. Not sacrifice in the dramatic sense, but in the quiet daily sense. Less comfort. Less mindless entertainment. Less emotional indulgence. In exchange, he gained clarity, confidence, and direction. He was no longer drifting. He was steering point. One evening, Daniel caught his reflection in a dark window and barely recognized the man looking back. Not physically, but internally. The hesitation in his eyes was gone. In its place was calm resolve. He smiled, not with arrogance, but with certainty. He knew now that desire was not about wanting more from the world. It was about demanding more from himself. And that demand changed everything. In the next part, Daniel will confront the final enemy most people never defeat. The subtle comfort of drifting once progress begins. He will learn why many people start strong but never finish, and how unwavering faith keeps desire alive even when results are slow. But for now, one truth stood clear. When desire becomes definite and persistence becomes identity, nothing can stop you except the decision to stop. And Daniel had already decided. Part 5. The silent enemy that almost stopped him. The danger did not come as failure. It came as comfort. Daniel did not see it at first. That was what made it so dangerous. Life had improved. Not explosively, not overnight, but steadily. His confidence was real now. His habits were solid. People respected him. Opportunities appeared with increasing regularity. For the first time, he felt stable, and stability whispered a tempting lie. You have come far enough. You can relax now. Napoleon Hill warned that the greatest enemy of success is not hardship but complacency. Daniel was about to learn how true that was. Progress had created a subtle satisfaction. He still worked hard, but the edge was duller. His morning rituals became shorter. Some days, they disappeared entirely. His evening reviews were rushed or skipped. Not because he did not believe in them anymore, but because things were going well. That is how drifting begins. Drifting does not announce itself as failure. It arrives as ease, as distraction, as the slow surrender of discipline in exchange for comfort. Daniel noticed the signs too late. He missed small details he once caught easily. He postponed decisions he would have handled immediately before. He justified small lapses with reasonable explanations. Just this once. Just today. I deserve a break. Napoleon Hill described drifting as the habit of allowing life to push you instead of directing life yourself. Daniel had sworn never to drift again. Yet here it was, creeping back quietly, dressed as success. Then came the warning shot. A major opportunity slipped away. Not dramatically. No rejection email. No harsh words. It simply went to someone else. Someone sharper. Someone more prepared. The old sting returned, familiar and uncomfortable. That night, Daniel sat alone and felt something worse than disappointment. He felt betrayal. Not from the world, but from himself. He knew better. This moment became a turning point more important than any failure he had faced before. Failure had sharpened him. Comfort had dulled him. Napoleon Hill taught that faith must be renewed daily or it fades. Daniel realized he had been living off past conviction instead of present discipline. So he returned to the fundamentals with humility. He reopened his statement of purpose. He read it slowly. The words still mattered, but they no longer burned the way they once had. That frightened him. Desire, he realized, is a living thing. It must be fed or it starves. Daniel decided to reignite it deliberately. He went back to silence. Back to intention. Back to visualization. Not as a routine, but as a sacred practice. He remembered that faith is not blind optimism. It is sustained belief backed by consistent action. This time, he went deeper. Instead of visualizing outcomes, he visualized endurance. Long nights. Delayed rewards. Resistance. Criticism. He saw himself staying steady through all of it, because Napoleon Hill never promised an easy road. He promised a meaningful one. Daniel also confronted another truth most people avoid. Growth demands ongoing discomfort. The moment you stop feeling stretched, you stop growing. Comfort is not evil, but it is dangerous when mistaken for arrival. Daniel raised his standards again. He demanded more focus from himself, more precision, more courage in conversations he had been avoiding. He stopped negotiating with his weaker impulses. This was not punishment. It was respect. Respect for the man he was becoming. Faith returned, not as excitement, but as calm certainty. The kind that does not shout. The kind that endures. Soon, tests followed. A project stalled unexpectedly. A partnership became strained. Results slowed. Old doubts tried to reintroduce themselves. See, this is where it falls apart. Daniel did not panic. Napoleon Hill taught that every challenge is a test of faith. Not faith in outcomes, but faith in process. Faith that consistent right thinking and right action cannot fail in the long run. Daniel leaned into persistence. He kept showing up when results were invisible. He kept thinking deliberately when emotions were noisy. He kept acting in alignment with his purpose even when progress felt slow. This was the phase where most people quit quietly. Not with drama. They simply stop trying as hard. They drift back into ordinary routines and call it realism. Daniel refused. He remembered something Hill wrote that changed everything. Faith is the starting point of all accumulation of riches. Faith is the chemical that blends thought with persistence. Without faith, desire weakens. Without persistence, faith evaporates. Together, they are unstoppable. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, momentum returned. Conversations led to new ideas. Ideas led to new collaborations. Setbacks turned into redirections. Daniel noticed something critical. The universe did not respond to desperation. It responded to steadiness. When he stopped chasing outcomes and focused on becoming consistent, outcomes followed. People began describing Daniel with words they had never used before. Reliable. Grounded. Visionary. He had become someone others trusted in uncertainty. That trust created leverage. He was invited into rooms he had never entered before. Not because he asked, but because his presence carried weight. His mind was no longer reactive. It was anchored. Daniel understood now why so few people finish what they start. The beginning is exciting. The middle is lonely. The end requires faith without proof. Most quit in the middle. This was the stretch Napoleon Hill referred to when he said persistence is the invisible force behind every great success. The world sees results and calls it luck. It never sees the quiet endurance that made luck unnecessary. Daniel also learned to guard against another subtle threat. Comparison. As his world expanded, he saw people moving faster, earning more, gaining recognition sooner. The old urge to measure himself against others resurfaced. He shut it down immediately. Comparison weakens faith. It shifts focus outward and fractures conviction. Daniel returned to his only true metric. Am I progressing compared to who I was yesterday? That question kept him centered. By the end of this stage, Daniel was no longer chasing success. He was building inevitability. He understood something profound. When your habits are aligned, when your purpose is clear, when your faith is disciplined and persistent, success is no longer a question of if. Only when. In the final part of his journey, Daniel will face the ultimate realization that true success is not something you reach. It is something you become. He will learn how to lock in this mindset for life so that no setback, no success, no season can ever take it away. But for now, this lesson was carved deep. Failure tests your courage. Comfort tests your commitment. And only those who pass both become truly unstoppable. Part 6. The day Daniel realized he had already won. The final realization did not arrive with fireworks. It arrived with peace. Daniel was walking alone one evening, long after the noise of the city had softened. The streets were familiar, yet everything felt different. Not because the world had changed, but because he had. For the first time, he was not chasing anything. Not success. Not approval. Not proof. He was steady. Napoleon Hill wrote that success is not something you pursue. It is something you attract by the person you become. Daniel finally understood that truth not as a quote, but as a lived experience. He looked back on the journey and saw the pattern clearly. The fear that once ruled him had not vanished. It simply no longer commanded him. Doubt still appeared from time to time, but it no longer held authority. Failure still visited, but it no longer defined him. He had mastered the one skill that mattered most. Self-direction. Daniel realized something that would have shocked his younger self. He was already successful. Not because he had reached a final destination, but because he had become the kind of man who could not be permanently defeated. That is the kind of success Napoleon Hill spoke about. The success that survives loss. The success that outlasts setbacks. The success that no one can take from you because it lives in how you think. Daniel remembered the old days of drifting. Of blaming circumstances. Of waiting for motivation to appear. That version of himself felt like a stranger now. Not because he was smarter or more talented, but because he had trained his mind with discipline and intention. He no longer asked life for permission. He no longer waited for confidence before acting. He no longer hoped things would work out. He expected himself to make them work out. This was the final transformation. Daniel understood that true freedom is not financial. It is mental. A person who controls their thoughts cannot be controlled by fear, by opinion, or by circumstance. He had learned to govern his inner world, and because of that, the outer world responded. Opportunities came and went, but his identity remained solid. Wins did not inflate him. Losses did not crush him. He had found balance, and balance created power. Napoleon Hill taught that the mind, once stretched to a new level, never returns to its original shape. Daniel felt that truth deeply. He could never go back to unconscious living. He could never again pretend that his thoughts did not matter. He had seen too much. He had proven too much to himself. Now he lived by a simple code. Think deliberately, speak intentionally, act decisively every day, without exception. Daniel also discovered the final paradox of success. When you stop obsessing over results and commit fully to process, results multiply. When you focus on becoming instead of getting, life gives you more than you planned for. People often asked him what changed everything. They expected a secret tactic or a lucky break. Daniel always gave the same answer: I stopped letting my mind work against me. That answer confused most people because it demanded responsibility. It offered no excuses. It removed the comfort of blame. But for those ready to hear it, it was liberating. Daniel now understood why most people never reach their potential. Not because they lack ability, but because they lack control over their inner dialogue. They let fear narrate their lives. They let doubt set limits. They let old stories decide their future. He refused to live that way ever again. Even now, he still practiced the fundamentals. Morning intention. Evening reflection. Clear purpose. Disciplined language. Focused attention. Faith backed by action. Not because he was afraid of losing success, but because these habits were who he was now. Success was no longer something he chased. It was the natural output of alignment. Daniel realized this was the final lesson Napoleon Hill wanted people to learn. You do not win once and stop. You become someone who wins consistently because your thinking is consistent. And that is unstoppable. He stopped walking and looked up at the night sky. Not with awe, but with calm certainty. He knew challenges would come. He knew uncertainty would return in new forms. But he also knew something far more important. He was ready. Not because life would be easy, but because his mind was strong. And that is the real ending of every great story. Not a finish line, but a foundation. Now this story turns to you. You have read the journey, but the real question is not about Daniel. It is about you. Will you continue to let circumstances shape your thoughts, or will you shape your thoughts and watch circumstances follow? Will you drift and call it realism, or will you decide and call it destiny? Nothing in this story is beyond your reach. Every principle here already lives inside you, waiting to be used. The only thing required is a decision, a decision to stop living on autopilot, a decision to train your mind daily, a decision to become deliberate about who you are becoming. Because once you understand this truth, there is no going back. Your mind is the source. Your thoughts are the cause. Your life is the effect. Master the cause, and the effect must change. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think differently, do not keep it to yourself. Subscribe for more powerful motivational stories. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today, and comment below with one thought you are committing to change starting now. Your next chapter begins the moment you decide it does.